I guess we'll just jump right in.
I'm terrified.
Okay. So 84, you started working out of like a television theater background with artists. And I think that first artist was Anne Hamilton.
Anne doesn't come along until later.
Okay.
In the beginning, I'm working with theatrical designers, film designers,
Okay.
live theater designers, which are, they're not far removed from the type of artist that Anne is, or I guess people you would call more recognized artists, but they deal with a different type of practicality, so that they're limited, they're in a structure that limits them, whereas an ordinary artist, I guess they're not ordinary, that's I don't want to call them that, but a person who calls himself an artist has more freedom to create.
And is there a different relationship with you when say someone from theater has kind of a more structured project that they're coming from versus the wide open fine artist approach?
The theatrical or television structure is much more of a committee than my typical artist client, who's creating the idea with a staff, but they work for her. The theatrical artist works for a director or a producer, or even a network, which provides a limiting structure, and that limiting structure can be really great. We only are serving the needs of this commercial, or we're doing children's television, so we have to do some sort of comedic spoof on reality, like Squeal of Fortune instead of Wheel of Fortune, where the pig comes out of the wheel.
Could you describe like a theatrical project versus maybe one of Anne's early ones, just so people can kind of
Well,
hear?
now you're getting yourself in real trouble, because the first project we did for Anne was as theatrical a project as could possibly be. It was seven different pieces. They were in a museum environment, but there was a turntable, there was an audio piece that disturbed water, there was the overarching piece was called the white cloth.
Okay.
An actual white cloth traveled on a cable rig in all the rooms of the museum, whether went up and downstairs, through holes in the floor and wall.
No, this is
way later.
okay. This is an Event of a Thread.
Right. This
Okay.
is in the Armory on Park Avenue. And this grew out of an amusement park ride called Swings, which is a very simple sort of amusement park thing, but it's really fun.
Is that the terrifying one that the swings kind of go out?
The faster it goes, But what's happening here, what you can't see is that because the chains on this seat go to the grid, which is 65 feet high, when you swing, you don't feel the arc the way that you did when you were a child on the swing set, where you were going up. You barely go up here. It's a very disconcerting feeling, because your body knows what's supposed to happen next, and it doesn't.
So did you guys build the whole thing, or was there a mechanism that you
We
worked
did
on?
not make the seats.
Okay.
They were made by a guy out in Utah, out of Elm. And what you can't see is that there are cages here with pigeons in them. We did not make the pigeons.
Did you make the cages?
No, they were purchased. They're Asian, and they were part of a collection. And then way at the far end is a record cutter, because there was a musical element. People would sing at particular times. There's a cutout in the wall, the end wall of the Armory, and a person would appear and they would sing, and that would be recorded, and then the birds would be released, and the sounds of the birds would also be recorded.
And the public is kind of wandering around this
Well,
environment?
I don't know if you can see that there's people lying on the floor under the curtain, because the curtain is actuated by the swings. So there are ropes tying the chains to the top of the curtain. So they go up, the ropes go up through a pulley and then down to the top of the curtain. The curtain is actually suspended entirely from the swings.
So this piece, there isn't that much like electronics per se, it's more levers.
There's no
and,
electronics in this other than the record cutter. And all we did, the record cutter is a real item that Anne told me she wanted, and they were looking all over the country for it, and I don't know why. I went on Craigslist and found one 6 miles from her house. But it's a real, that was a real instrument. Everything else was fabricated.
Can you talk a little bit about the conversation you had with Anne before this piece kind of solidified?
One of the really great things about working with Anne is that 50% of the conversation has nothing to do with the art. It's about how are the kids and what are you doing and where can we go for dinner and let's go on vacation together. And the other 50% is about establishing a vocabulary for the art. The art's not realized in any way, shape, or form. In the beginning, it was a picture of that swing ride and the idea that we would somehow suspend some number of swings from the roof of the building.
And she knew it had to fill this space at this point? Or
It was a work for this space. And in fact, it's an attempt has been made to restage it elsewhere, but finding a building that can manage it is very difficult.
Because this building's very large, the Park
It's
Avenue
huge,
Armory.
and it has a very tall ceiling, and the roof is arched. There's a building in Perth, and there's a building in Moscow that we looked at, but both of them didn't have the ceiling capacity to handle the loads, because you just hanging the swings is the easy part. When you introduce the dynamic load, you start to twist the trusses. So you need a very stable roof.
Okay.
And this kind of building, like a lot of older buildings, was over-engineered because nobody really knew what they were doing. So kind of like the Brooklyn Bridge, which has cables going both ways, because nobody knew that you could do it all with vertical cables.
Was there a lot of testing, safety testing and stuff for this project?
There was a lot of engineering review, and of course we did one.
In your studio or?
No, here, because who has 65-foot ceilings?
True.
And really, what we wanted to test was the armory. We knew that if you had a chain long enough and a wooden seat, that it would function like a swing. What we didn't know is what will happen if you move that pendulum in an arc with a load on it. And so we hung a swing and got on it.
Yeah. Do you use any kind of engineering software or just kind of testing? And
This was a little bit difficult for software. This was much more actual mathematical calculations. It's pretty simple stuff. You've got a torque that's imparted by the pendulum. You can calculate the period of a pendulum, which is kind of an interesting side diversion. The pendulums don't change. But the question that we didn't know the answer to was, how will the trusses behave? How does the roof behave? Because it's antique stuff. And you can look at the size, but you can't really speak to how well was this iron made.
Did you have to, in the process of kind of testing the building with the piece inside it, were there any compromises that you had to bring to the artist? Like, we have to, I know you want it to look like this, but in order to make it safe.
There are not as many swings as she first wanted. There are 42 swings, and she wanted 60. But we were going to kill somebody. Because,
Not the best outcome from public art.
well, you know what's funny about this public art? The real danger was there are little kids in the room, and there's these big wooden seats.
Yeah.
The seats were 42 inches long, so two people could sit together, and they're heavy. So kids are going to get clonked in the head. And they did. But nobody sued. You know? There's, people make allowance for this sort of thing. People
Yeah.
lined up literally all the way around the armory.
It was very popular.
It was hugely popular. I actually know two people who met there and got married.
No.
Absolutely. One of them is a friend of my wife. I gave them a swing for their wedding.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yes, it was a magnet, and it was incredibly successful.
And this kind of, I mean, it sounds like you have a, at this point, decades-long relationship with the artist.
Yeah, in this case.
In this case.
So
What are some of the
my
other?
first piece for Anne was in 1998,
Okay.
so 21 years.
And you've done things recently, as like 2012, I think was your
Yeah.
last piece for her. What was that one called?
You think I know what I did in what year? I don't know what I did last week.
Okay.
And I don't know what anything is called.
Oh,
So
that's
you
right.
knew, you remembered that this was called Event of a Thread, but for me this is called Armory. Because we learn about projects when they're incubating, so we only know where they're going
Yeah.
and or what they look like.
They're named much after you've been involved.
Yeah, I don't have anything to do with the naming, so it doesn't, nothing in my computer says Event of a Thread.
Yeah.
Everything says Park Avenue.
Okay, so when you worked with Spencer Finch, what were some of the places that you worked on pieces at?
We have the very first
This one with
piece.
the stars.
Oh, okay,
lightning
so
bugs,
this
sorry.
is, as everyone must surely recognize, Act 2, Scene 3 of Hamlet
Of course.
by Fireflies. So now I know that there are multiple species of fireflies, and that in all but one, the male and female blink differently, so that there's no interspecies mating, because you know the blink rate that you're looking for.
So this is a piece where these lights mimicked
Oh.
firefly.
There was an insane
Mating.
amount of firefly observation performed for this,
Done by you
They're
or done by the artist?
done by the artist. And there are 990 fireflies performing this piece.
Which are little,
Tiny LEDs.
okay, like they're not fireflies tied to a string.
No,
Okay.
no, we once did for an artist, a choreographer, we once did fireflies in a jar that were LEDs, battery powered, so they could carry them around while they danced. And then people protested because we
They
were
thought they were.
killing fireflies. Which I suppose was true if you took the batteries out.
So how did you?
And this piece actually traveled. This went to Milan, and then it got a new life where the fireflies were on reeds, which were brass tubes.
Okay.
And that's now outside of an Amazon building in Seattle.
How did you control the blinking?
I can't tell you that. It's all.
Trade secret.
It's all, the main brain is an Arduino, but the file generation was much more difficult than the controlling of the actual switching of the LEDs.
And you did all the components on this one.
Spencer wrote the script, and then we had to convert that into data that could be read as a file by the Arduino.
So was it like a 2-hour performance that repeated over and over? What was the script?
It's as
format?
long as it would take you to perform that scene of Hamlet,
Okay.
and then there's a pause, and then it plays again.
That's really lovely.
And I used to know why Act 2, Scene 3 was important, but not anymore. And all the LEDs have names, so not individual names. Like there's 200 LEDs that are Ophelia, and 175 that are Hamlet.
So that he could like score the.
So he could. We had to come up with a way that the artist could make a spreadsheet that reflected what's going on in the script so that we could then turn that into some kind of usable data.
And he works quite a bit with like natural phenomenon.
He worked quite a bit with light. A lot of his pieces are about ink.
Mm-hmm.
We did a piece for him called Glacier, which is an ice machine and a ramp, a fabricated ramp, and a 5-foot square aluminum white pool. And he spent 3 days getting the watercolor right.
He was dyeing the water.
He dyed the water with, I mean, it was an amazing amount of water, and he'd put in like a half a drop of some dye, and then we throw that water away. And
Is it difficult working with artists when some things are so exacting and other things are so kind of nebulous or like a conversation?
no, it's great when they do it. It's like, go ahead, have a great time. The pool didn't leak, yippee!
Yeah.
But it literally was, it recycled itself. We did it at RISD, at the museum at RISD, and that museum is so humid that you, honestly, you look at the art and you sweat. So the evaporation rate is very low. So the water from the ice maker would make ice. It would fall into the chute and become a glacier, and it would drip slowly into the pool, and then it would be pumped from the pool up into the ice maker, and it would constantly refill itself. And because the evaporation rate was so low, we didn't lose much water in 3 months. It was, but that was, if he wants to worry about the color, that's great.
Yeah. Was there any issue with like contamination? I know Robert Gober's pieces at MoMA that had the recycling water in the bathtub, and there was like a crucifix that poured water. They had some problems with like dust and stuff getting into it.
MoMA is unbelievably dirty.
Humanity walks through it all the time.
Well, it's not. You know what it is? I don't know if I'm allowed to say this. It's denim.
Oh.
It's all
that-
denim.
That's the lint that builds up.
The lint from blue jeans walking through that museum, it's everywhere you go.
That's intriguing and disgusting at the same time.
We did a piece for Jim Hodges that had a pool. And the pool was filled, it was 5 feet deep and 5 feet in diameter.
Is this the disco ball piece?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And it has an amazingly small amount of black koi pond dye in it. So the water is inky black.
You can dye koi ponds black without hurting the koi?
Yeah. You can go look up koi
That's
pond
crazy.
dye online and
Okay.
get a little bottle with a dropper. And
I guess it makes the fish pop?
I don't know why, we didn't have any fish.
Yeah, sorry, side thing.
So-
I'm just surprised that you can do that.
We wanted to make it opaque, and it took almost nothing. We thought we were going to have to put a gallon of this stuff in, but it took nothing. But that water was filthy all the time. And
That was
because,
at Gladstone Gallery, I think, yeah.
and we literally cut a hole in the floor and excavated 5 feet deep and made a pool. Had it,
And that disco ball rotated.
the disco ball, the ball rotates, and there are 4 automated lights that track it. So it's rotating slowly, and it's descending into the pool until it's just barely submerged. You can't see it anymore, and the lights fade out. And then it does the opposite.
Can you talk a little bit, I mean, these pieces that we've looked at, they're all kind of public in that this piece is in a gallery, so people are interacting with it, but they have to continue doing what they do over and over again for an extended period of time, maybe longer than an event or a theatrical thing. Is it hard to make kinetic work that performs continually in the same way?
It's hard to make anything that works. Now I'm really telling stories out of school. I have done some work for an artist who once told me a story about doing a piece on Michigan Avenue in Chicago in a very long, skinny gallery. And they'd been up for nights and nights getting it right, and the main piece was a track that ran down the length of the gallery and had a large metal ball on it. And the ball was at the end of the gallery, the far end, and then the big event was it would begin to move from the back to the front. And they're all standing around in their dirty, smelly clothes from being up because they haven't had time to go back to the hotel and shower, with their wine glasses. And the ball begins to move, and it's really amazing, and everybody's oohing on, eyeing as they watch the ball, and it breaks its chain and falls onto the floor, and it's rolling and rolling, and the artist and her people are backing up towards the back door as the ball goes through the front window of the gallery out onto Michigan Avenue. And then she called me, because that was the straw that broke her camel's back. So none of it's easy. And getting it to work for a long time, we did a piece for Anne Hamilton at the Venice Biennale in like 2000, I guess. And subsequently we were doing a different piece for her, and we're having a meeting with her gallerist and the curator from Mass MoCA. And they were concerned about things working. And Sean said, I looked at all that stuff in Venice and I wouldn't have given it a week, but it ran for 4 months.
Yeah, because something like a non-fine art context, like say the light fixture that you did for the Beyonce video.
But that only had to work for one video's worth of time.
Yeah, probably practice and a few takes and.
Yeah, but she's a famous person, so how much time could she have given them? A day, 2 days?
Yeah. Is it a different kind of? Is it more stressful to make stuff work longer? Are there like engineering problems that occur?
There's always something that's gonna. There's always a surprise. The rainbow's never got a pot of gold at the end of it. So you're building a piece like this, and you think you're doing it the right way, but you probably don't have enough time, and you maybe if you're lucky, you have enough budget. So you build the thing, and then you find out when the director sees it that maybe it wasn't quite what they imagined. But for this, you have no time to change it.
So like lead time is much different in this kind of fabrication job than a fine art, or is it hard to
It's
set?
really hard to come up with sufficient lead time that allows you to prepare the piece literally months in advance and run it at length so that it has a total dry run, and then install it. That's what happens in a Broadway show.
Yeah.
They have lots of time, and your day is, next Tuesday to Thursday we're going to tech your thing, and then the show doesn't open for previews for another month. So it'll be worked into the show, and during that time maybe they'll call and say, we need more batteries, or there's some other thing, or now we have this new idea. I've had battery-operated props on stage in a Broadway theater to show the director where you can't get the people to look at it until the batteries died,
Yeah.
because they're so busy with other things. And then sometimes they just don't want it because it's too expensive, and you have to gamble.
Do you
We did
get
Uncle Fester's light bulb for Adam's family. They didn't want to pay for it. So we built one and brought it into the theater and said, don't look at this. This is how bright it is. And everybody looked at it, and they bought 10
Yeah.
because they couldn't see after that.
In that kind of testing period, does your company ever get brought in to fix a problem? Like something
It's
you...
the best. There's
Why?
nothing better than fixing somebody else's problem, because they've done all the stuff. They've established all these parameters. Oh, it's going to be made out of this, and it's going to look like that, and we're going to have this size motor, and we're going to have, this is where the switches are going to be, or this is the path of the automation. So now you're coming in and you get to look at it. It's like fixing a car. Somebody else figured out how to build the car.
And you have a
You don't
background
have
as
to
a
do
mechanic
that.
too, that I'll
I do.
say as well.
But, and I say to people all the time, of course we could build you a car. It would cost $5 million. Or you could go to the car dealer and get one, like
Yeah.
tomorrow. No lead time.
Yeah.
And if you, what you want is that car to have green headlights,
Yeah.
just buy the car and we'll put green headlights in it. You know, so fixing somebody else's problem is great.
What about when it has to do with like artwork restoration, which is a little different stage in the
We don't
lifetime
do
of an artwork?
like easel art restoration.
Mm-hmm.
We do, oh, this never really worked. A couple of years ago, we did a piece called Ice Bag that was a Claes Oldenburg piece.
Mm-hmm.
And we weren't allowed to take it out of the crate till the conservator came, which meant then we put it back in the crate, pretended we hadn't taken it out of the crate.
You weren't allowed to touch it for because
Well,
only the conservator's allowed to handle it, or
no,
insurance
because
purposes.
they want to see the condition when it comes out of the crate.
Uh-huh.
So we put it back in the crate, we took it out of the crate, and we figured out what was wrong with it and why it didn't work while the conservator was there. And then we had a period of time when we could come up with a price and do the work. And
What
then
did the piece do? What did it?
the ice bag inflates. So it looks like an old school ice bag like you would see in the cartoons for somebody who's
like a
having
headache, yeah.
a hangover, yeah. And it starts kind of flat and then it twists and inflates and does the opposite. So it has motors to rotate the pieces. It has a blower to fill up the bag. And apparently this thing was built in 1973. The original fabricator's still around. I don't know who that is. And they wanted that person to restore it, and they said no, which is how we wound up with it. But the unexpected part of that was that the motors had died over time. They were really old. We were able to buy new old stock motors on eBay,
Wow.
which was really great, but that was not acceptable
To the
to
conservator?
the conservator. So we had to send the motors out to be rebuilt. We
Why
put
was it
them
not acceptable? It was too
because
much
they were
material
because
changed?
of what's called provenance.
Mhm.
What was there in the beginning has to stay there. That's where the value is. Except that in the art that we make, that has nothing to do with what we're doing. In an odd way, I'll circle back to Anne. We've done a bunch of pieces with Anne that involved some form of writing. And it may not be obvious, but the connection between the writing instrument, the arm, and the shoulder to the brain is a big piece of what she does. So that kind of conversation is part of that establishing vocabulary that I referred to before. That gives you a basis on which to build something, and you build that entirely from that vocabulary. So
When
it
you
doesn't
say
matter.
vocabulary, you're like talking about the artist's desire to, what it means when she says it moves fast, or
No, not at all.
not even that
No,
specific?
what I'm talking about is, let's suppose that what we're going to have to do is drop paper on a floor, one sheet at a time, thousands of them.
Mm-hmm.
So we're picking up the piece of paper using a vacuum suction cup, and then we're transiting the paper on a track, and then letting the paper go so it floats down through the air. That's a mechanical representation of the artist standing on top of a ladder with a sheaf of paper, dropping the paper onto the floor.
So she does the action, and she's like, how do we make this?
Yes, but less of this, right? It's not about the diaphragm, it's about the arm.
Okay.
So this core stuff has nothing to do with the piece.
So she
It's all
presents a
this.
motion, and you help her translate it or mechanize it.
Too complicated. She's on top of a ladder. She's dropping paper on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
She's watching the paper. The arm's not in the conversation yet, right?
Gotcha.
The arm comes out of this development. So the conversation is about, I want to drop paper on the floor, one sheet at a time, and I want it to do that thing. I don't want it to tip over and fall on the floor and be a knife. I want it to hang. I want that hang time. Then in the conversation, in reaction, I might say, here's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing the arm taking the paper, which is a target of writing, and it's moving that paper out away from the body, and then the paper is falling when the arm lets it go. And from that comes the opening night, when the paper has writing on it, and the artist and her friend are reading in turn from the pieces of paper and dropping them onto the floor as they read them. Each one has a phrase or a sentence, while the machines are dropping paper around them.
Okay.
So the process of establishing this, what are we doing when we're dropping paper on the floor, is an exploratory process. It's not a predefined motion. It's a predefined action, just dropping the paper. Everything else came later. On the other hand, when I do a piece with, say, Alice Aycock, it's been developed and developed and developed in the computer. There's a 3D model in the computer of what it is. There's
Her work is kind of like large. Is it kinetic? Or is
Because
it
parts of it, sometimes
Okay.
parts of it move, but
large metal abstractions? Kind of? I don't know how I'd describe them.
I once had to present for her because she wasn't able to present a piece. And I went to Anaheim to present this piece for the transit hub there. And it was a competition with 15 people, so wasn't likely to get it anyway. And I had to explain her concept to other people. And I'm really not capable of doing that. I mean, I can imitate the motions that she uses when she's explaining things. I can use her vocabulary or the words that she uses, but I don't have the depth of understanding of that process because I wasn't there in the
Yeah.
beginning.
So she comes to you with a very well-formed vision and amount of information about what
Yeah,
the piece
she's
should
worked
be.
really hard for a really long time to get that imagining thing into this awkward 2D medium of a monitor as some sort of a 3D representation, which is, I guess you call that 2.5D. Doesn't really have depth.
Yeah.
And you can't walk around it. You can rotate it, but you cannot feel where it will be in space, which leads to, could you move it over that way 2 feet?
Yeah.
Because now there's something behind
Yeah, I was
it
going to
that
say,
don't
is it
like.
hard to translate from 2D.5 to a real visceral
Always.
relationship?
Plus, the computer can bend things in ways that you can't really do.
Has there been a project where that was like a real problem with the artist, like the reality of a three-dimensional thing versus
I think it's
the
always,
rendering?
there's always some difficulty for the artist in translating their idea from their brain to this real lump of stuff that you make, because it can never be as beautiful as it was. It can never be this fabulous thing that they envisioned. And sometimes you
It's
think,
always a little
well,
disappointing.
this is not complicated. This sounds really straightforward. Yeah, let's make 99 of those, and then 99 of them that don't work exactly the way you want is painful.
I've had a conversation with people about fabrication where the reality of the object is, like you said, never as beautiful as it is in your mind, but that kind of relationship of the disappointment or the making of the thing and then working with what physically is there can give back a lot to the artist. Can you talk about being in the middle of that conversation between the object and the artist?
The hard part of what you're talking about is the receptiveness of the artist to see what is revealed, as opposed to the desire of the artist to see their idea actually revealed. And this is the kind of, I get to complain about people at home to my wife, but I don't get to complain about people in public.
Of course not.
So there are people who have a very clear idea. There are people who want to see what happens. And there are other people for whom anything that you do will, by definition, be wrong, and we're going to have to fix it.
You've mentioned in the past kind of how much you put yourself into these projects, like the line between, like how to professionalize this relationship of you exploring with someone, or can you talk a bit about, I mean, you've had this business for a long time, like how...
Yeah, I'm old.
How do you, at what moment are you like, we're now working on an artwork, rather than like, oh, we're chatting about something, or...
When you're chatting about, well, in all of these relationships, that's really what you're building. You're building some sort of communication relationship with a person who's got a vision that you have trouble understanding. So, for example, when you work with an architect, some architects will give you an amazingly clear idea of what they want. It may not be possible, but it'll be clear.
And quite a few of your clients are architectural
Yes.
projects.
Some architects are artists in their own right, and one of the great frustrations of their lives is getting people to understand what they want.
Mm-hmm.
It can be a tremendous obstacle to the creative process to have to deal with all these people who make things and really want only to use 2x4s. It's how do you take an idea from a gesture or emotion and turn that into some part of a building?
Yeah, there was a really lovely video on your website for the New York Times building project that showed the artists going through the first few drawings and proposals, and they were talking about how hard it was, or like I'm quoting them when they say how bad the first few ideas were. Said it took a really long time for them to like find the thing that they wanted to do, kind of in the way.
In the New York Times building, the artists even created their own font, even though you would never expect that. Or, sorry, not font, typeface.
Can you give a quick description of what the project does? Because it's a little hard to tell
There's
from
560 vacuum fluorescent screens hanging in columns of 7 from the cove of the lobby. And the artists mined the archives. Well, I would say if they had to tell you what the hardest part of the project was, they would say it was getting access to the archives of the New York Times.
Really?
Yeah. It was very difficult. Although, in hindsight, not only did Mark get access, he organized the archives in such a remarkable way that they subsequently hired him to
bonus
manage their archives. He was teaching
Wow.
out in California.
This is
and he
Mark
would-
Hansen and Ben Rubin that
Ben
did this
Rubin.
piece.
But Mark is a statistician, as he likes to say. He was the only non-engineer faculty member in a school of engineering.
Mhm. It seems like
He is-
this piece for him, the 2x4 was the archive, the information.
Well, the information, the problem was that he wasn't allowed to have the 2x4. And he had to persuade them, because I don't know what they were worried about. But I don't think there's anything in the archive to be concerned about. But what they did was they took the data from the archive and they collated it and into a series of shows that appear on these screens. Some of them are geographical, some of them are entirely based, one is based entirely on wedding announcements.
Huh.
So that a sentence from the wedding announcement will appear in one screen, and then you'll hear the typewriter typing away, and a line will draw to another screen, and there you get a new fact. So
And did you help him with the code that helped with the harvesting, or was that his?
no, that was all Mark.
Okay.
He pulled, because we weren't allowed to have access. And he wrote the shows. We wrote the firmware for the displays. So each display that you see is a Noritake display which we could purchase. And then on the back of that is a single board computer and a tiny, tiny little sound card and a tiny little speaker, so that you could hear the sound of the typewriter typing directionally. Those cards run Linux.
And how long has this been? Is it still in the New York
Over
Times
12
building?
years.
Wow. Do you have to do any maintenance on it, or?
There's one spot where every March there would be a leak from the ceiling.
You'd lose
And
the
it would
same
take out-
4 monitors every time.
Yep.
Yep.
And so we made little plastic roofs.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Cute.
we didn't have a problem. But last year, we had to go in and replace 4 computers. The displays are only supposed to last 10 years, and they're in their 13th year. So there's
This is kind of
a conversation about replacing it.
Yeah, this is a business-aimed question, I guess. Like, do you write a contract with the artist or whoever is considered the client? Like, how long you're willing? It's your responsibility to keep these things going.
Generally, there's some conversation about, I guess, what you call a warranty,
Yeah.
which is always problematic, because the client, who might be invisible to us, like the New York Times in this case, might have a different idea of what's appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, I can't warranty the display, for example, for any longer than Noritake will. But we do run into that. We did a project for Ann Hamilton in Puerto Rico. It's kind of an amazing thing. It never opened. It's in a museum in the southwest corner of Puerto Rico in a lighthouse with 360-degree water views, Cabo Rojo. And when the government changed, they defunded the museum. So the piece was there, installed, working, never opened the museum. They made us write a 10-year, they made the artist provide a 10-year warranty.
Wow.
And I said, Anne, you can't do that. The motors are warranted for 2 years.
Yeah.
You can't warranty them for 10 years. So she got lucky. It's more than 10 years. Never been turned on since we left. Because honestly, that was an absurd piece of business. We're going to fly to
Yeah.
Puerto Rico every time you have a problem for 10 years.
I mean, for this project, were you like, it should run 4 years, and then if anything happens?
Oh, no, we wouldn't warranty this any
Yeah.
longer than a year, because that's
Okay.
what Noritake does for their displays.
Mm-hmm.
They have two things. They have a warranty, and that will replace them, and then they have an expected life. But this thing is on all the time.
Yeah. The news never sleeps.
Well, it doesn't actually display the news. It's
Yeah.
all archive
Archived.
stuff.
Could you talk, just as a last project, a little bit about the Fischl and Weiss snowman?
When my son was
Project.
little, we used to watch The Way Things Go
Mm-hmm.
on video,
The best video ever.
tape, until we wore it out. And I got a phone call one day, actually from the Matthew Marks Gallery, although I didn't know it at the time, because this had arrived from Chicago to MoMA, and they couldn't turn it on. Which apparently
Was there a
had been,
snowman inside? Like, if they can't turn it on, did it melt?
Oh, when it arrives, no, tails out of school again. When it arrives, it just looks like an aluminum form of a snowman.
And then it, like, frosts up?
And yes,
Okay.
it has a humidifier,
Oh, the illusion is
And-
shattered.
a condensing unit, and it is essentially a deep freeze. And yes, you have to keep poking his eyes out and clearing his mouth.
It's someone's job to do that? That's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's, and eventually there will be too much snow, so you have to clear some of it out.
You have to defrost.
No, you'd have to dig it out.
Okay.
You don't want to defrost him. Defrosting him takes 2 weeks, and rebuilding him takes about 2 weeks. He gets frosted up quickly, but he's not super attractive in the beginning.
It's a little lumpy.
They. But the problem was that it was built in Switzerland, and it had a condensing unit, a refrigeration unit, that could only work on 50-cycle electricity, and we're, of course, 60 cycles. So we had to make it turn on. It's not the motors of the condensers are fine, but the electronics wouldn't behave.
And
So-
that wasn't the conservator wasn't like, this messes with the provenance to change this.
No, we didn't change it while I was at MoMA.
Okay.
I made it work. But I did say, don't ever turn it off. And then the artist was there, and I met him, and I'm rarely excited to meet an artist because I usually don't have any idea who they are. But this one I was actually excited to meet, and I told him, and we had a nice conversation, and he said, one of those, where were you when we were building it kind of things. And of course, I was right where I always am. I'm here. But he said nice things. And I thought, that's the last time I'll ever talk to that guy. Because nobody ever calls. And when it was coming out of MoMA, when they closed, MoMA decided to acquisition it, which is arty farty talk for I'm gonna buy it. And they sent it to me to be restored. So we've restored its outer skin, which was in sad shape. It's aluminum.
Because it was
It
outdoors.
lives outdoors
Yeah.
in San Francisco and then Chicago and then here for a year. And we replaced the refrigeration unit with a unit that will work on 50 cycle or 60 cycle. And they've been running in our shop for over a month now.
Yeah, do you test everything before you let it go extensively?
Who the heck has that kind of time? I'm doing props right now or we're doing props right now for Little Shop of Horrors off Broadway. And they're giving us hours
Wow.
to come up with things. And can you deliver it this afternoon? There's no time to test anything. It's like, oh, it worked in the shop.
Yeah.
One of the big theatrical lies. There's just no time. I don't know what happened with that show. I don't know how it progressed in the beginning. I just know that they've brought in big guns to deal with the show at this point.
Yeah.
And they're paying some hefty salaries. And the reason we're doing it is because we've done work for some of those people before. It's not,
Yeah. Awesome.
but it's showbiz.
Show must go
You
on.
know, you build something, you test it, you bring it into the theater, and the director goes, I don't want a brown clock. Like, well, this is the clock you gave me. I don't know what color you want it to be. You didn't say.
Yeah. People don't know until it's in front of them.
Oh,
Or,
yeah, it's often true. I'm married to a visual artist. She's a lighting designer, and we talk about how we'd like to move some wall in our apartment. And she says, "I can't visualize that. I can't see what you're saying.
Yeah.
You have to show me," which is impossible.
2 feet to the left.
I don't have wheels on walls.
Yeah. Awesome. Can we maybe open up for questions? Does anyone have any questions for Marty?
But I want benign questions.
Nice friendly questions.
I want the questions
Any
that I already
questions?
know the answers to.
Check. Okay. Actually, I do have a question, then I'll pass it around to anybody else that has some questions. Have you ever either, I'm sure you probably have, walked away from a job, or when you walk away, like what are the sort of red flags that you see prior to anything that might happen? You don't have to go into specifics of the client, but just.
It's not red flags. There are times when we just can't. I just got an email today from somebody who wants something in February, and we have a big piece that's going into MoMA that opens in February. I don't think I can commit to that. And I hate this. I hate turning things down.
There's nothing where you're in the project, you're halfway through, and then something
The artist died or something, I suppose we would stop.
Yeah. 2008 happened.
No, unfortunately, sometimes you're in the middle of these things and you really desperately want to quit. I production managed Toy Fair and Pre-Toy Fair for Mattel for 6 years. And if there was ever a job that would make you want to quit, that's the job. They were not nice people, and the pressure's tremendous.
I love how it was Toy Fair.
Sorry,
Yeah.
the elves are not the best people. But you can't quit. You said you would do it, and you do. There's a great story that I like to tell about a shop that would build things for us in Dallas, Texas, and they got in a dispute with Mattel about money, and it was a fair amount of money. And Mattel said, "All right, well, we'll pay you, but then you won't work for us ever again. Well, they owed him the money. And so they said, fine, we'll take the money. And the owner knew he had to go down and tell the men, there's not going to be a ton of overtime for Christmas this year because Toy Fair was always in February. You worked like a slave in October, November, December. You made a lot of overtime. And he went down to the shop to tell the men. He got up on the bench. He gathered everybody around. He told them the story, and he said they surged forward to me and they grabbed me and they hauled me off the bench, and I thought they were going to take me outside and beat me. And they took him down the street to the bar, and he couldn't buy a drink all day. Because people were so happy to be set free. You make a lot of money. You love making that money, and can't spend any of it because you have no time off. But it drains you. It turns you into a bad person. So yeah, I would love to give them up, but you can't. Once you say yes, it's the most dangerous thing you can say.
Okay. Any other questions? Anybody? Yeah.
I was just wondering how you got into this kind of work. Like, how did you realize you were good at this? How did you decide to start a business in it?
How much time do you have? I've been telling this story for a really long time, but it's really hard to condense it. I'll skip all of the. I'm going to skip to the end of college. My wife had a job at Pace University in the summer, and I was working at NYU in the theater, and she said, they're going to be hiring in the theater at Pace in the fall. You should come and meet Lenny. And I went and met Lenny, and we got along really well, and he asked me if I was going to take the union test, which was a meaningless question to me. So he explained that the stagehands union had an apprentice test, and he was going the next day to sign up. So I went with him, and I became a union apprentice in a scenery shop. And I was not the greatest scenery builder, but I was the apprentice, so they were happy to let me attempt to make things that were electrical and electronic because they didn't have anybody doing that for them at the time. And in 1984, nobody remembers this, but there was a recession in 82, 83, and that meant that the owner of the shop was really doing work for cost. And we had a project that he asked me to do on the side instead of on salary. But the accountant didn't want to pay me W-2 and 1099 in the same year, so I had to come up with a company name. And that's how Prefection Electricks got started. And then I was at breakfast with my wife one day after we'd been working overtime for about 6 months, and she said, I don't like this. And I said, because I don't like conflict, well, I was thinking of leaving anyway. And I went to the owner, and we had a conversation, and he was a very smart man who never finished high school, who said, ultimately, after offering me a lot of things and my saying, well, you'll speak badly of me if I accept any of these bribes, he said, well, you've got a lot of stuff here, tools, whatnot. Why don't you just keep all your stuff here? You'll keep the key to the electric shop, which you already have, and you can be Perfection Electricks, or you can go work in the studio or theater or wherever, whatever it is that you want to do. Just commit to do my work when I have work. And then there was never any spare time to do anything else, because automation became a thing in the late 80s, and everything got automated, and everything lit up, and everything needed something new and some dazzly piece of business. So the way I sum it up is, it's kind of like you're standing on the street corner and the bus comes along, And for some reason, you get on the bus, and then you just wind up where the bus takes you. I didn't intend for any of this to happen. The question isn't, how did you get here? It's, should you have? You know, it sounds great. And yes, let's be honest, I get to take time off whenever I feel like it because it's my company. But when things are going south and things don't work, it's not so great. You know, there's people putting hubcaps on, making nice livings, and I'm jealous sometimes.
Can I ask how big your business is? How many employees do you have right now?
4, which is about all I can manage.
Mm-hmm.
When we're doing installs, we have more, but it can get a little bit ungainly. You kind of need to have 2 or 10. And 10, I'm not a very good business person. 10 is probably too many for me, which would mean that I'd have to have somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And that probably would have been smart at several junctures, but it would have been devastating when things were slow.
Yeah.
And there might not be a business if I had to support a partner.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, maybe having a partner would have meant lots more business, and
Never know.
no. It's kind of like gambling. If you don't bet, you don't know if you would have won, but you didn't lose anything either.
Any other questions? Oh, yeah. One in the front.
So at several parts of this talk, you had mentioned your wife and her reactions to your business as a motivating force for how you do one thing or another. What are her feelings about what you're doing at this point? And are you still in love with each other?
Well, I'll go backwards. Yes, I'm still in love with my wife. We've.
Each other.
How would I know? I believe the PR as it's delivered. I would say that she would have preferred that I made more money and that we could retire. But that I don't see retiring for another 10 years. Now that could be a family problem. My dad retired when he was 89. And it could just be my distorted view of how things should be. But every once in a while you go to like a financial advisor person and they say, how much money will you need to retire? And you start to add up stuff. And then you hide your head under the pillow. It's frightening. You know, we would all be a lot better off if we worked for a hedge fund. I know it sounds really hideous, and I never imagined, but...
But then we would never poke the eyes out and draw the smiley face on a snowman.
Well, I would
every
never
week
have
for
met,
years.
I would never have met Peter Fishley.
Yeah.
And that's pretty awesome. And I would never have gone on vacation with Anna Hamilton and my family and her family. And, you know, it's... I love what I do, ultimately, not every minute. And I'm sure, you know, hedge fund managers don't love what they do every minute either, and maybe a lot less minutes than I do. But it would, you know, there's nothing wrong with a little financial security. It's really hard. You know, when I was an apprentice in 1980, the owner of the shop was getting $70 an hour for our time. It's decades later, And it's hard to get $100 an hour for time, and everything costs more money. It used to be that you bought materials and then you threw a lot of labor at things because you could afford to. Now labor is expensive. Materials are randomly priced, changing every day.
And your company even moved to Bayonne, New Jersey.
We moved to New Jersey, but I have to say that my shop is air conditioned and I really like it. But it's not. Fixed costs are one thing. Variable costs that vary are difficult. So if you're building a piece that features 9,000 pounds of aluminum, and the price of aluminum is fluctuating so much so that now when you get a quote from the aluminum vendor, it's only good for 7 days.
Wow.
It used to be, there was no such thing as a quote that wasn't good for 30 days. It was just boilerplate. Now it's only 7 because they don't know. They have no way of knowing. It used to be that you bought 6061 T6 aluminum only when you needed to because it was expensive, and you bought the cheap 5051 stuff at general purpose aluminum all the time. Now, because 5051 comes from China, it costs more than the good stuff.
Crazy.
How can you prepare? How can you
you
quote a job?
Your quotes don't change every 7 days.
I've never written good for 7 days. I've written good for 30 days on quotes that people haven't signed for a year, and we don't change the price because we're so happy they're finally moving. I'm doing a job right now that's been delayed because they talked about it for 9 months. And every time they would talk about it, they would say, "Do you think there's enough time to build the piece?" And I would say, "Yes, if you pull the trigger, there's enough time." 9 months went by until finally they said, "Do you think there's enough time?" And I said, "No."
And that's the moment they want to do it.
Who knows? But so the date got pushed back. It had to be. Can't do it. Can't get the material.
Yeah.
Okay, anyone else? Or
Anyone
is
else?
that-
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. I guess I have 2 questions, and one of them is, did you ever consider yourself an artist?
No. People ask me this all the time, and they argue with me about it, but I don't consider myself an artist. I am not.
Not
I
right
am.
now, but ever in your career.
I can draw a straight line. I'm really good at that. Circles, not so much. I can't draw. I do a lot of work with architects, and they're all really good at sketching in perspective. I'm not so good at that. I can fake it, but if there's something round, I can't draw round things in perspective. I just didn't spend enough time doing it because I never wanted to be an artist. I started out wanting to be an auto mechanic, to my parents' great horror.
Do you consider yourself an engineer?
Nope, you gotta have a license
Okay.
to be an engineer. I'm somewhere in between.
Like on the form when they're like occupation,
Manufacturer,
manufacturer.
because that's what's on the check boxes.
Mhm.
I make stuff, but I can have a really good conversation with an artist, and I can have a really good, solid conversation with an engineer, and I can have a really good...
You're probably the person translating between those two people.
That's what I do for a living.
Yeah.
I can have a really good conversation with a construction manager on a construction site. I can get my guys to be safe. I get along with people. That's about the best thing that I do. But no, I'm not an artist. Some people think that I'm an artist because I create art, but I'm not.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for people seeking a fabrication shop to do their work I had the experience where I want to get somebody to do something for me, and they want to use 2x4s. Maybe I'm not looking in the right.
There seem to be an awful lot of shops out there doing things. It's hard. I think that you ultimately don't need a shop that does what you want as much as you need a person who's interested in your project. Somebody who's interested will get you a lot farther for less than someone who just makes money. My landlord is a big scenery company. And I'm sure that the owner is very well off. I've known him since 1985. He's very good at watching the bottom line. I'm not so good at that. Like change orders, they're just a pain in the neck. The job we're doing for Little Shop of Horrors, I had to force myself to sit down with the one guy who's going to the site all the time and say, okay, what did you do? Which hours did you work? And now I'm going to have to go argue with the show over getting paid for those hours. Which is, they went into the restaurant, they ordered the food, now they have to pay for it. Everybody, I've been told by people, I'll pay anything. That's a much bigger lie than the check is in the mail. No one wants to pay anything. They just want you to do what they need right now because they're in trouble for whatever reason. When somebody says to me, I'll pay anything, I say, then we'll just do time and material, and they always argue about the bill. You need somebody who wants to do your job because they care about it.
I've heard frustration from people that the fabrication market, I guess I'll use the word market, is like a lot of word of mouth, of hearing of someone that does something or connecting a person with a person with a person. But I think some of that system reflects the kind of connecting of people of like minds or the same kind of curiosity or people that would be interested in a project. I don't think it's an ideal model because then it is hard to kind of access that network. But I do think you'll have more success talking to people that like your work and asking who they've worked with. Then, like, there is no Angie's List for fabrication, and I don't think just a straight database would ever quite work. You need someone to help bring people together on a more personal excitement level.
But it would be nice if every once in a while you knew who made that.
Yeah.
That's a really hard thing to find out.
Mm-hmm. Some people are starting to, some institutions are starting to list some of it, but I know some fabricators who don't want it to be public knowledge.
Still, I spent a great deal of time looking for a thing that I used to be able to find really easily today.
Yeah.
A flat Fresnel lens like they used to use on rear screen projection TVs, and used to be able to buy them in plastic shops all over New York City. They're really a pain in the neck to get now because they're all made in China or Korea, and you have to get them shipped in. And unfortunately, I need it now because I have a kooky client who's got a day and a half of lead time available to them.
So is eBay your friend? Buying
Sort
stuff
of,
used and
but you buy something from eBay, you have absolutely no idea when it's going to arrive.
yeah.
I don't know. I love when you buy something on eBay and it says, oh, the seller's on vacation for a week. Not going to ship it till they get home. That's not my world. My world is, ooh, Amazon today? Like it.
Drone it in.
I haven't seen that yet. The drone hasn't come. The van comes all the time. McMaster-Carr is our friend.
Yeah.
It's, I remember learning about McMaster-Carr, and it was like a miracle. And because we're in New Jersey, and so are they, we get our deliveries 4 to 6 hours later.
Wow.
It's, I can get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, order something online, and have it by lunchtime. It's great. And you can return anything to them, everything. We send huge, massive boxes of stuff back to them all the time because that's their business model. So they're our stock. Oh, get all the screws you think you might need. We'll just send them back.
Okay, anyone else, or is that it for questions? That's it?
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That was wonderful.
It was not as horrible as I thought it was going to be.